Hey y'all, welcome back to Things Come Together, where we talk about the history of soul food and how we made magic out of our toughest moments. And good morning, sunshine. Today's check-in, I'm feeling good. Like I was a little tired. But I got me a nice little power nap in and we back. We made it. So I'm feeling good right now. And for how do we get here, I'm sure you all saw today's dish is dressing. And I made a seafood dressing and I put it with some cabbage and fried catfish. And I did a seafood dressing because, as y'all know, I don't eat meat. Even though I'm a black Southern pescatarian, I prefer not to cook with meat. Even though the cabbage, I did, again, put my turkey necks in there because y'all know how I am. If I do have to cook with meat, it's going to be a turkey neck. But I don't eat turkey, so even in the turkey necks, I don't eat the turkey neck. So when I made the cornbread dressing, I put seafood because that's the type of protein that I eat. And I actually had seafood stuffing, which I believe they call it in South Carolina, because like I told you, I have a lot of friends from Charleston, and so I've had it there. This is not a traditional seafood dressing stuffing, so don't kill me, okay? I put in the types of seafood that I like to eat, so it has crab, shrimp, and then I topped it with some of those lobsters that you could get in the frozen pack from Trader Joe's. And I sauteed those in some butter and garlic. Delicious. And then made it like a traditional dressing, which the recipe I got from my grandmother, who in my opinion makes the best dressing, but I'm biased on that. But it is different from like the seafood stuffing you'll get in Charleston, because I believe they put oysters in it, and I'm sure a bunch of other seafood that I didn't put in there. I'm not a fan of oysters, so I didn't include them. Even though the seafood stuffing that I tasted delicious, I just don't like oysters, so I didn't include it in there. But at some point, I do want to do bigger episode on the cuisine in Charleston and places like New Orleans. And I've never been to Savannah, Georgia, but I've also heard really good things about Savannah, Georgia, because I feel like those three places did a really good job at preserving the actual African influences and African culture. And so I love thinking about the history of cuisine in those three places. But in terms of today, like I said, I did more of a traditional cornbread, but I just substituted the turkey meat for seafood. And, I feel really good about the history behind dressing. And, with the last couple of episodes and learning more about some of the origins and how, we adapted those foods and put our own twist on them and, made them, in my opinion, better than what some of the original cultures, how they prepared them. But at the same time, doing this work and thinking about the history of soul food, it can be a very heavy topic because, as we know, soul food, like we talked about in this, the premise of this show, comes from a really dark time in Black history. It wasn't the beginning of our history, but it was a very crucial point of our history. And although we were able to make magic, you can't talk about that magic without talking about those experiences and those conditions. So, of course, that's some of the things that is coming out as I'm doing more research about the history of soul food. But, I'm feeling good about the history of dressing. So, dressing actually goes all the way back to a dish called Kusha that was brought to America to influence dressing by enslaved Africans, specifically Islamic enslaved Africans from West Africa. And then I also saw it pinpointed to Senegal and Gambia. And then also the Hausa culture, which I didn't necessarily know had a presence in Senegal and Gambia. I'm more familiar with the Hausa culture in northern Nigeria, But I also understand and know that Africa's countries are divided based on Europeans and not actual African people. And so a lot of the country lines are split and divide tribes. So even in the sense of Yoruba people, you will find, like, it's popularly known that Yoruba people live in Nigeria, but you will find Yoruba people in Benin, Togo, Ghana, and I'm sure many other countries across West Africa. So it was interesting to hear like about the Hausa influence and Senegal and Gambia's influence on dressing. So like I said, it predates all the way back to a dish that they call Kusha, and that would have been short for couscous, and it in general just meant a grain that would have been boiled. And so again, in this case, that grain probably was more popularly couscous. And even that history of like Islamic West Africa, I'm sure could probably dates back to the Arab slave trade as well, which I don't know as much about, but I am aware of and always thinking about that as well when we think about the context of Africa today. And I'm sure we could do a whole episode about that as well. And I'm sure at some point we will get deeper into that. But in terms of today, it goes all the way back to a dish called Kusha. And the original dish that was made in the US was called Kush. And it was basically like a cornmeal hash. And of course, we know that corn is native to the Americas. And so cornmeal was originally introduced by indigenous Americans. Native Americans, some people call them indigenous people, some people call them. But yes, Mayans and Aztecas, I think. Yes, Mayans and Aztecas were the first people to use cornmeal to produce tortillas. And so as Europeans came to the Americas, they were introduced to cornmeal too. And then later when enslaved Africans came to the Americas, we were introduced to cornmeal as well. And because it was similar to a grain and was the more accessible grain for enslaved Africans because they didn't have as much access to rice and wheat. And so corn was what they would be given more often. They used it and created a dish that would have been similar to kusha, which they would have made before coming to the Americas. Kush, like I said, would have been a cornmeal hash, and it would have either been boiled or cooked on like whatever kind of stove top they had at that time. And it was a hash because they would put onions and other herbs and pork fat with it. And so that was like the original dressing. And we talked about this before in previous episodes, but I'm sure as African people had more access to ovens, that's how they started to create what we know as the cornbread dressing. So yes, at first it started as kush, and then it evolved into dressing. And so yeah, that's like the history of cornbread. And I wanted to talk about today, when we think about bread, that makes me think about money. And we know that bread is one of the nicknames that people give to money, as well as like cheese, cheddar, things like that. So, last episode, I talked about my sexual journey, and you would think that would have been a very vulnerable topic, which it was, of course. But I actually feel more comfortable talking about sex than I do money, which is interesting. Like, I didn't think about that until I started preparing for this episode, but it's true. And I think a lot of that has to do with like my upbringing, but also just in general, like Black people's relationship with money. Like, we came to this country as enslaved people. So we, have a very layered relationship with money in this country, especially because so much capital, like all the basis for capital in this country, came from enslavement. So that was our introduction to capital in this country. But yeah, so even through the years, like I grew up basically between two worlds. So on one part, finances in general were like very secrecy. And I mean, to be fair, I was a child. So like, how much did I really need to know about the family finances? But I also like remember it being like an intentional like secrecy of like not necessarily talking about like how much money was in the household, so to speak. And then I also was raised and spent a lot of time with my grandmother. And so my grandmother, I feel like, gave me a balance when it came to finances because she was always really big on savings. Like, she would be like, every pay period, put $25, even if it's as little as $25, like put it aside for yourself so that you have something for yourself. Like, she really was big on the whole like pay yourself first premise. And so she was always big on that. And in general, like my grandmother was a cook and she worked for the Cook County Hospital. And so she didn't like, she was not a high earning person, but she always had some money. Like she saves her money for real. So I had that grounded foundation from my grandmother, but then I also had influences of like, splurging. I grew up in what would have been considered a middle class household. And, to be honest and fair about it, it probably would have been lower middle class because I don't know how much money it was. I can't say for sure. But I believe it would have been a lower middle class household, but for a Black person in the 90s, like we was rich. So a lot of it was about splurging, which I can understand because as a Black person, we come from not having a lot. And so once you get some money, like it's like, okay, now I'm gonna get everything that I may have wanted before I had access to this money. And also like you put in so much hard work, and at that time, like my family worked in corporate America, so you dealing with all of the politics and racism and sexism that comes along with that. A lot of times self-care is being able to like splurge on yourself. So I feel like those are the two worlds that I was raised in. And because of that, I feel like that has impacted how I deal with money as well. And so I definitely have a splurging bone in my body. It's a real thing. And at the same time, like at least being fiscally responsible enough to make sure like all of the bills are covered. Like that's the priority, like making sure that, we paying things on time. But at the same time, of course, I have made financial decisions that were not responsible. I have fallen back on things as well. So I'm not saying I'm perfect, but for the most part, trying to make sure that I'm like being financially responsible with taking care of my financial responsibilities, but also like making time for enjoyment as well. And so, yeah, like when I was in college, I had a scholarship program where every year I made $1,000 a month. So I was able to like really cover a lot of my financial responsibilities during college without having to have like a job outside of college. So while I was on campus, my last 2 years, I had to do intern and a lab at my school, but I didn't have to go and work like an additional job outside of that. So a lot of things taken care of financially. And like I said, I made sure the bills was paid, but I did not have the best savings practices back then either. Like that $1,000, I would definitely spend it every month. And so, it was college. You're trying to keep up with the Joneses, trying to make sure like dress nice, hair is laid, things like that. So definitely did not make the best financial decisions in college, but also I was young. So, that happens. What I will say, I was in a college prep program that warned us about credit cards. And so that was something that I did not have an issue with when I was in college because they told us like, they're going to offer y'all these credit cards. You're going to rack up all this debt. Like, don't do it. So, although I wasn't the best at savings, I didn't rack up a lot of debt outside of student loan debts, which like, because I was an out-of-state student, I just had to pay for it. Even though I had scholarships, I still had to take out a fair amount of student loans. So, that was like my early forms of finances. And then once I graduated, I decided to come back and start organizing. And I don't know if y'all know this, but organizing is not at all a lucrative field. So part of the financial issues that I had early on was that I just wasn't making enough money to be doing a whole lot of saving. And like I said, my grandmother, she wasn't a high earner and she still was able to save, but for me, that wasn't, I didn't get hip to that. I wasn't on that wavelength. And so, just like struggling to like make sure that I had enough income to take care of myself was like a real thing. And, I made like a decent amount of money, but like I said, it just wasn't a lot to be trying to save, nothing. And it's so funny because like when I was really young, it's considered doing social work at one point. And when I found out how much social workers make and how much it costs to become a social worker, I was like, that math don't math, like I'm good. And then I became an organizer. And so I don't know what happened in the meantime between those two, even though I do know, like I do truly believe that organizing is a part of my purpose. And, I'm exploring other things like cooperative economics and just business in general. So I'm like somewhat moving out of that space, but at the same time, it's always going to be with me and inform how I even do business and cooperative economics. And even just cooperative economics, I feel like it's an extension of organizing. Like it is the financial arm of organizing. And I do feel like a lot of times our movements are not as successful as they should be because they don't have an economic basis. We rely on donations, and I do feel like there's a lot of charitable money that comes through organizing. And at the same time, it's not enough for us to free ourselves. And to be honest, and this is not against leadership, because as someone who has been a leader, not necessarily, I would say as an organizer, of course, I've been a leader, but not necessarily as a decision maker, so to speak. But even when I started working in government, like you as a leader, like a lot of times you do have to make difficult decisions that people may not and probably will not. Like some people will not agree with the decisions that you make. So I have learned to be very patient when it comes to leaders, even though I do have a lot of critiques still. But I will say that even a lot of the money that does come into organizing is not making it to the people who are actually most impacted and doing the everyday high contact work. So that becomes a big issue. And I feel like with cooperative economics, it levels the playing field, or has the potential to level the playing field a little bit more. But all of that to say is like, as I'm thinking about moving into those spaces deeper, I'm still like thinking about like the organizing that I've done in the past and like how that work has impacted how I think about things financially. So, just getting back to the story of like finances. So I really didn't start making any real money until I started working in government. And that was the first time that I had a salary. That was the first time that I had benefits. That was the first time that I had retirement savings outside of like Social Security, which, they are constantly telling us that by the time we retire, or people at my age retire, there will be no Social Security. And I had heard about, because like right after I graduated college, I read this book by Susie Orman, and I'm gonna chop up the title, but something like Young, Fabulous, and Broke or something like that. But it was a book that was specifically geared towards young people and just teaching about like financial literacy. And so I learned a lot of principles in that book, but I just didn't have the finances to be able to practice those, or at least didn't do the best that I could with what I had at the time. So, like I was able to have a pension when I was working for the government as well. And, not my preferred place to work, really wasn't. It was a very interesting experience, but nonetheless, I was there and had a level of financial freedom that I hadn't previously had. But at the same time, I started working for government like a few months before COVID. And so when COVID happened, even though I was still able to save a decent amount of money, a lot of people around me were losing their jobs, and I was like helping to be able to support people during that time. Like obviously not enough to sustain, but doing a little bit that I could. And so that like, I was like finally making some money, but then it was like, okay. And I think we don't give enough attention to the people who, even the people who did keep their jobs during that time, like it was a while before people's unemployment started kicking in. And I had people in my circle as well who wasn't able to get unemployment. And so it was like, okay, well, I'll do the best that I can during that time, which meant that I wasn't able to save as much. but I still had a decent amount of money during that time. So I was like doing decent with savings, and then made the bright idea to get married. And that started to like weigh in on my finances. And once like everything with the marriage started to go bad, I like had to like really narrow in on my mental health, which meant that I had to do more self-care, which self-care doesn't have to be expensive, but in some instances you do have to spend more money to take care of yourself, whether it's going to get a massage, or it's going to, travel and take some time off. Or in my case, I even took a month off with FMLA, but that is unpaid. So I had to be able to support myself for a month without having no income. So that started to weigh in on my finances as well. And then once I separated with my ex, the person I had been splitting bills with, I now had to cover everything on my own. So it wasn't a lot of space to be saving a whole lot then either, not to mention that the government was taking a decent amount of money for the pension contribution. I want to say it was taking like at least 150. Like I can't remember the exact number, but when I first started with the city, I was making like 60,000 a year, and so I think they were taking like 150 a month. And even though I feel like it was a little bit more, but I know it was at least 150. And then when I left, I was making 70, and so it was a little bit more than that was being taken out every month. And so that technically was my savings at the time, even though it's a retirement plan, so you don't have access to the money. But nonetheless, that would have covered my savings on top of like keeping up with my bills and doing as much self-care as I could during the time. So once I like started to realize that job experience was going to be coming to an end, and I was already like knew that personally that space was not a space for me anymore. And so I was like, okay, trying to prepare for my transition period. But unfortunately, everything ended before my transition period. And so a lot of the plans that I was thinking about was like, oh, I'll be able to take some of my pension money, roll it over into a Roth IRA, live off of some of it, and then use another part of it to be able to start a business. But unfortunately, I've been going through a divorce, and you cannot touch any of your finances really when you're going through a divorce, because it will be considered dissipation of marital funds, and you can be penalized for that. So all of this time, and it's basically a year that I have not been employed at this point, and I have not been able to touch any of my pension money because of this divorce. Like I have, found ways to get income here and there, but it's nothing that compared to what I was getting or what I would like to do now that I've left. But I'm in this space where I don't have the capital to do a whole lot. So, it's been an interesting period. Like I remember when I was still working and I was thinking about like transitioning out, like it was really important to me to be able to like sustain myself during that time, because I just remember what it was like before I got that job. And right before I started working that job, I still was making a decent amount of money because I was like working, like hustling. Like I got 2 jobs, and at one point I was working for a very short amount of time, was working 3 jobs. And so I still was making a decent amount of money, but I was able to make a decent amount of money in one spot once I started working for government. But I just remember that time before I was working those 3 jobs, and how just terrible it was. Like being broke is terrible. Like, and people know this, but I think a lot of times in movement work, we look down on people wanting to get out of poverty. And I've even been judgmental about it as well because of my critique that I have about capitalism. And I still have that critique. And at the same time, I'm at a point like I gave my youth to movement work, and like am still going to be doing that work. But at the same time, it's like, okay, well, now I have to be able to financially secure myself. Like one of the things that I really love about cooperative economics is the whole idea of economic independence. And for me, that's really what it's about. It's like, I need to be in a space where I'm economically independent, where I can really help support the people in my lives. Like it's things that I would love to do for my family, but I'm not in a position to do them right now. So being able to get to that space is really important for me. Like I'm not trying to be, a billionaire in the sense of, I understand in order to be a billionaire, you have to extract capital from the labor of people who really deserve to make money off of their own labor. So I'm not saying that I don't want everything that life has for me, but I also understand that I don't want to exploit people in order to get it. So in that sense, I'm very mindful of that. But at the same time, like, I do want economic independence. I do want to be able to better support the people in my life and better support myself and have a family and be comfortable as far as mentally, like, comfortable about how I'm able to take care of my family. So that is really important to me. And I just remember being back when I wasn't financially secure. And I will always say, like, I don't listen to Young Boy, but when he say never broke again, like, I really feel him. So that was like a big thing to me. But unfortunately, like, I have found myself in a situation where I do not have the financial resources that I would like to have. And, I make it look good, but it's not easy. And I'm looking forward to, getting past this moment. And like I said, being able to do more of the things that I envision during this time. So once again, the divorce is over. Looking forward to making more moves and actually moving forward on the things that I've been wanting to do. But we're not going to let that stop us. So still, like, thinking about different ways that I can do what I can with what I have now. But yeah, it's this whole divorce thing, like I said, is more than an ocean, more than I anticipated. But it's okay. And the thing about money is, like, sometimes you up, sometimes you down, but the thing is, like, not to stay down. And so that's what I'm keeping in my mind. And also just knowing, like, this too shall pass. Like, I didn't want to be in this situation, but I'm not going to let it break me. And I'm not going to stay here. Like, this is a temporary moment. And it has caused me to sit down. Like, I'm not, like, moving around the way that I used to be moving around, which I feel like is good because I needed to come back to self. I needed to ground myself. And I feel like this experience has allowed me the time to do that. Like, I was already working on it, but I still wasn't able to do it as much. And so unfortunately, things aligned where, the job ended and I've been in this situation, but I've also been able to see the good in it too. So that's the whole financial journey. Looking forward to being able to, like, report and share more about how things are more on the incline. But, like I said, things happen, like, especially being a Black person or just an everyday person. Like, poverty is not just for Black people or not just about Black people. Like, everybody go through things. Everybody go through financial things. That's one of the reasons why we are able to be in solidarity with each other, because, like, the majority of the people in this country are living paycheck to paycheck, but especially as a Black person and our history with money in this country, it happens sometimes. And this also feels like a great time to say, like, we deserve reparations. Like, y'all need to give us our money. And, like, just let us be free. Like, not to say that things are going to be perfect, but, like, at least give us enough financial space to be able to, like, come together as a community and figure out what we want to do. And I do believe that Black people have the ability to do that. Like, yeah, we're going to have to work out some things along the way. But I was just listening to a podcast where they were talking about Reconstruction and how much Black people were able to achieve during that time. And I don't think that there's no reason why we couldn't do the same thing once we get reparations. So I'm definitely, like, all about that. Like I said before on some of my social media posts, I believe that is the only thing in the Black agenda that we could probably agree on. I believe in self-determination when it comes to Black people. And there are also Black organizers and Black leaders that said, like, you're not going to get us to agree on a lot of things, and that's okay. Like, we're not expecting other cultures to agree on everything either, so that's okay. Self-determination is really important when we think about Black liberation, but we should have the freedom to self-determine. We should have the freedom that no matter how you feel on the issue, like, to be able to make the decisions that you feel like is best for you. So we ain't got to agree on everything. But in order to get some things achieved, we do have to have some level of unity. And for me, I just feel like reparations is one of those things that we can have unity around. So just wanted to put that nice little plug in. And as far as don't be rude, so there's been the whole topic trending about favorite crash out. And I want to nominate myself. I want to nominate myself for favorite crash out because, earlier this year, I did, in fact, crash out. Like, terrible, terrible way. And it honestly wasn't that bad, but the bad part about it is that it was public. And so that was like why it was such a big deal. And, I'm not going to come at folks, it wasn't like the worst crash outs that I've seen. Like, I didn't pretend to be kidnapped or nothing like that, which, like, I'm not even going to go in on her because it ain't no telling what she was going through too. So she was crashing out. She was having some issues going on. So I want to extend grace to that person. So let me be on my best behavior. And at the same time, I also want to say, like, it was a mild crash out, but it was a big crash out for me because I'm a very private person. Like, I just started being more active on social media, but before this, I was very private. Like I've said before, I would come on, share my political thoughts, give a Bible verse here and there, and be on about my business. Like, I crashed out about a man that I wasn't even with. Okay? Child. Crashed out about a man I wasn't even with. Like, a man that I wasn't even really communicating with. Like, that's really the crazy thing. Like, this person was, like, social media flirting with me, like, liking pictures, commenting on posts and stuff like that. And I decided to slip into this man's DMs and, just crashed out. Just really crashed out. Sending multiple messages, unanswered messages, like just the whole nine. And, he was able to see that, like, something was off about the way that I was communicating with him. And it was like, I was not in the best mental space. And, I'm one of those people, like, I talk about my mental health openly, and every time that I've had a breakdown, it's not just one thing. It's been, like, multiple compounding things. Like, even my therapist will say, like, it's like it be multiple things that are happening together that's causing this. And so that was the case during that time. And for whatever reason, like, this person became an object of interest during that time. And this is how you know that I just wasn't in my right mind, because I just would not have done that otherwise. Like, I be really talking my stuff, and I really am P. And, like, even especially since my separation from my ex, like, I be keeping it real P. Like, I do not play when it comes to men, because it's like, I just don't have time. Like, what we doing here? Like, how are you adding to my life? Like, that's really how I deal with men in a lot of ways. And if you're not adding to my life, like, I don't be bothered with you. So the fact that I was crashing out about somebody that was not adding anything to my life, child, like, and then, like, the fact that I was even speaking about it publicly online, and, like, granted, this person started bringing it to the internet first, which is why I, like, started responding as well, because, like, Cancers, we don't got no good sense. So it's like, okay, you want to go here, I'm gonna take it here. So that became part of the issue as well. And eventually I had to bring myself up out of that and let it go. But yeah, it was just all bad. And I want to say, like, during that time, like, everything that I communicated to this person, and I still hold true to. So I wasn't, like, making things up out of thin air. I still hold true to those things. But I do recognize, like, again, me not being in the right space, and how the way I was communicating impacted that person. So, I don't mind apologizing when it's necessary, and I will apologize for the way I was communicating during that time. Not necessarily not what I was communicating about, because, like I said, I still believe that those things are true, but I understand, like, the position and, like, some of the thoughts that it could have created for that particular person. So I will offer that apology. I'm, like, big enough to apologize. I do believe in accountability. And so just like want to be transparent about that. I try to put a lot of intention into the ways that I move and my actions. And so I don't do a lot of apologizing, but I do, like I said, believe in accountability. So when I'm wrong, like I can admit I was wrong and I was going through something at that time that spilled over to this person. But yeah, just like really crashed out. Like y'all didn't even see my engagement pictures until 3 months after that man proposed. Y'all never saw me post wedding pictures, like ever. To this date, still haven't posted them. And it would be so funny because people would come up to me and being like, "Oh, how's marriage?" And I'd be like, kind of looking like, "How do you know that I'm married?" Because I never posted about it. But then I had to realize, like, people who came the day that we got married, like they posted pictures. So that was really how people knew about it. And every time somebody asked me, I'd be like, "Quick." Because it was definitely grand opening, grand closing. Like, I didn't even have time to post pictures because that's how fast we separated. But nonetheless, like, I wasn't even doing all that about the man I was married to. So the fact that I crashed out like that is like, yeah, it was a lot. But you know, you live and you learn and you move past it. And I still believe that there was purpose behind that happening because I probably still would not have been as present on social media if that had not happened. And so it definitely like sparked me to like, you know, shake it off and move on to the next thing, which was creating this podcast, again, creating a song. And like I said, just being more active on social media, like posting more and things like that. So I'm excited about just moving forward and glad that is behind me at this point. And I wish that person nothing but the best. Like I really do. I don't got no bad feelings towards the person. Like, you know, I removed that person from my social medias just because like, you know, I want to move past that moment. And I feel like it was difficult for me to move past it, continuing to see their posts. So I'm like, let me just like cut this out and move forward with this. So that's what I'm doing now. You know, players mess up too. And, you know, just charge it to the game and moving on. You know, ain't nobody talking about, you know, how y'all be pulling up on people with things of the such, and crashing out. Even though it's not a public crash out, you know, we players mess up too. Like we all done had a crash out or two, so it's okay. But yeah, and as far as greatest place on earth, as far as affirmations today, I'm gonna affirm everybody that's working on financial goals right now. Like, we got this, you know, we are capable, we are able, you know, God is walking with us along this journey and putting us in the places and bringing us to the experiences that we need to reach those goals. And, you know, I'm excited for us to reflect a year from now on where we were and where we made it to. So I'm sending affirmations to everybody that's working on financial goals right now. Like, you got this, we got this. And like I said, I'm excited to see what we do next. So I'm going to go ahead and clock out right now, but see y'all. See y'all.
Violation.
We don't even call these men our men. These be our friends.
Never give your all to a man. You don't fall for that man.